I got needs. Occasionally, I set them free. Don't hold me back now, I'm in the lead. This particle life. This particle life. What a time to be alive. Lately, I've been dancing on my own so bravely.
And I forgot my mic. Hello, good morning. Welcome to Resistance Live. It's the 26th of June, 2024. Nice to see you all here. Welcome. Very busy news day. We had Supreme Court opinions this morning. We had very busy stuff going on yesterday afternoon, and it's going to be chaos through the end of this week. I've warned you guys of this now multiple times, but just like hang on for the ride because it's very intense right now. Okay, first things first, I'm coming to you as always from occupied Tongva territory. Today, for our visually challenged viewers, I am wearing a white top with a black blazer over top. My hair is pulled back. I have my thick gold hoops in. I am a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty blonde-haired woman. And I am sitting in front of my plant and my lamp and my chair. And you can't see the bookshelf today. So, you know, that's how it goes sometimes. All right, welcome. So first things first, we had a ruling yesterday from Judge Juan Merchan in the criminal case in which Donald Trump has already been convicted of 34 crimes. And there was a kind of strange misreporting of this order because some people thought it was really, really good and some people thought it was awful. So I want to make it really clear that actually this is the ruling that I expected to come out of Judge Merchan's chambers. And it is a kind of like 6 of one, half dozen of the other sort of ruling. So essentially what Judge Merchan did was he kept the gag order in place for court staff, family members of the judge and the district attorney, and other parties that are involved in the court system. Okay, what he did not do was extend the gag order as to witnesses or other parties to the trial. All right, that is actually quite normal. And the reason why this took place is because the purpose of that part of the gag order was to protect the integrity of the court process while the court case was pending, so that, you know, like anything that Trump said about Michael Cohen or Stormy Daniels wouldn't adversely impact the jury and the jury pool. Okay, this is not unusual. And frankly, I'm not surprised by it one bit. It is not a loss. It is not something that we should look down on. Frankly, the gag order did its job while the case was pending. And now at this point, we have an ongoing gag order as to court personnel, family members, etc., because those people are still involved in the process or related to people who are still involved in the process. But the other folks are not. Okay. And Stormy Daniels put out a really very smart, strategically great post on this yesterday on, I think on X, in which she said the following: "We trusted the judgment of Juan Merchan during the trial. He ran that courtroom with integrity, and we trust his judgment in this regard as well." Now, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially what it said. And that is exactly where we should actually be, right? Judge Merchan knows what he's doing. I don't think any of us have any complaints about how he's handled this trial or the post-trial process so far. So this is his decision. I don't think it's a bad one. I personally think that actually it's very smart. It also lends itself to the argument that he is not biased in favor of one side or the other in the event that there's any argument about that on appeal, because he's given a little bit back to Trump now that the trial is over, and he's extended it to court personnel and their families who still need ongoing protection. Super, super, super smart. All right. And again, what we've seen from Judge Merchan is that he has done everything possible to avoid any appearance of impropriety so that the guilty verdict will withstand appeal. And that is the case here as well. And let me just say one other thing here, right? If Trump defames someone, right? Those people can sue him, just like E. Jean Carroll did. So, you know, there's other means by which he can be held accountable if he chooses to attack witnesses at this time. But personally, I'm not particularly bothered by this. I think it was a good decision. I think it was a smart decision. And I think it's an indicator of the fact that certain protections remain necessary. But this judge, and frankly, other judges, are not interested in curtailing Donald Trump's political speech. And that's great. Frankly, that's great. That's like what we want. All right. So I feel very good about that from the standpoint of where we sit. All right. We had a couple of opinions out of the Supreme Court this morning, 2 of them. Very briefly, they concern the issue of the Biden administration trying to get social media companies, this is one of them, to take down disinformation related to COVID. All right. And the case that was one of the cases that was ruled upon this morning by the Supreme Court was a case where essentially like COVID deniers had their posts removed from various social media platforms, and various state officials also did. And at that point, they sued the Biden administration and Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General, in an attempt to claim that they had been silenced under the First Amendment. And the court ruled in a very strongly worded opinion that in fact they had no standing to do that, because it wasn't essentially that they had been quieted by the government. They had been quieted by social media companies, with the government having discussions with those social media companies. Now, the good news about this is it opens the door for the Biden administration to work at the current moment with social media companies to prevent election-based disinformation. That's one reason why I'm really pleased about this case, because it does mean that between now and November, the handcuffs are off the Biden administration to try to stop social media companies from endorsing, posting, or allowing to remain posted posts that are explicit disinformation rather, related to the election, related to voting, related to the positions of the parties, anything like that. And it will work in favor of election security. So very good decision, okay? The second decision was a decision where essentially the conservative justices ruled that while it's totally improper to take a bribe, I mean, the irony of this in light of Alito and Thomas and potentially others is just like really grating. While it's illegal for a government official to take a bribe, they can take a tip after the fact. I wish I was kidding, but they actually ruled this morning that gratuities for past conduct are not bribes. And, you have to look at something like that through the lens of this current Supreme Court and, understand that this ruling is quite, ironic, obvious, another sign of corruption, all sorts of other things. And that was a 6-3 ruling with, of course, all the liberal justices dissenting. Okay, so that's what we've gotten this morning. Now, I'm going to remind you all, we have 2 more days of Supreme Court decisions on the docket for the remainder of this week. More tomorrow, more on Friday. Ordinarily, the Supreme Court term ends on the 30th of June, which, by the way, is Sunday. Okay, it looks like they're trying to get everything done between now and Friday. If they don't, it may carry over to a couple of days next week. Now, I have to talk about something here very specific, because I once again posted something on Threads this morning, and people just are falling prey to outrage when they don't need to. All right. And I will tell you that I am very, very bothered right now by the number of, how shall I put it, quote unquote commentators who are ginning up their audiences about the idea that SCOTUS has somehow delayed the Chutkan case through the election. All right. So I just want to talk about the facts here. All right. Assuming that we get the ruling that we are expecting out of the Supreme Court on immunity, which, and there's no way to know until it comes out, but the vast gamesmanship of the bar is that we're going to get an order that sets up some kind of test of what constitutes presidential authority, the scope of presidential authority, such that immunity could apply to certain acts. All right. Assuming that we get that tomorrow or Friday, Judge Chutkan's case will be on deck to go to trial in the middle of September. Okay, I want everybody to just pause and acknowledge this. Assuming that that is the ruling that we get tomorrow or Friday, Judge Chutkan's case will be on deck to go to trial in the middle of September. All right, now, lots of naysayers and people it's never going to happen, happening today online. That's not true. No, that actually is true. If that's the ruling that we get, there will be an evidentiary hearing, certainly, probably with briefing, maybe with witness testimony about what constitutes an official act under the new test the Supreme Court puts out. But there is nothing to delay the trial from starting in mid-September with an evidentiary hearing in between. I'm going to tell you right now, it would be along the lines of a pretrial evidentiary hearing. Those are conducted all the time, as a part of pretrial procedure. There is nothing here that would prevent Judge Chutkan from conducting such an evidentiary hearing in, let's say, hypothetically, July or August, and still having a trial date that starts in the middle of September. Okay. Now, for everybody who's like, oh, but they're going to appeal that. They may try, but I'm going to tell you there's no interlocutory appeal of right for pretrial decisions, okay? When you get an evidentiary ruling that says that's not going to be admissible in this case, ordinarily, the way that it works is you go straight through to the jury trial and then you get to appeal. You don't get to appeal every single little tiny decision that's made in pretrial procedure. That's not how it works. So everybody looking at this right now from the perspective of like, oh, they've handed Trump a win in advance of the election, truly is misleading you. First of all, because nobody knows exactly what's going to happen in this opinion. But second of all, because if they do what everybody pretty much expects them to do, we'll be on trial in the 6 weeks leading up to the general election. Like Donald Trump will be on trial for trying to overthrow the US government in the wake of the 2020 election, 6 weeks, in the 6 weeks preceding the 2024 election. And that's if he's not already in prison while that trial is going on. Okay. So just please, I mean, like seriously, I know there are people who are pissed that it took the Supreme Court this long to make the decision, but in some sense, if it goes this way, we couldn't possibly ask for better timing. And I am bothered by how many people who were like, oh, this should have been tried 4 years ago. Oh, the documents case, he would have already been in prison if he was any other one of us. I just have to say something about that stuff, all right? Again, I feel like I have to say this quite a bit here these days, but I'm going to say it again. The United States justice system does not function like a 50-minute episode of Law and Order, okay? So many people have been just so wildly misled about how quickly the United States justice system turns in this country, okay? I've shared this before. I'm going to say it again. I had a case that started in 1999 that did not even get a ruling on a motion to dismiss until 2008, okay? Motion to dismiss being like what is ordinarily like the preliminary decision making in a case. This was a federal court case in the Southern District of New York, okay? The speed at which things are moving here is actually quite quick compared to like what you would have seen in other circumstances, all right? Yes, there is a right to a speedy trial under the Sixth Amendment. Most defendants waive it, but I'm just going to say this. Anybody whining that this has taken too long really doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, I truly mean that. The fact that Robert Menendez's trial has moved so quickly is a kind of curious conflation of a very proactive judge and a district that isn't overwhelmed and busy, okay? That's not the standard operating procedure in cases in New York. Now, the Southern District of Florida, a different story. You spent a lot of time talking about Judge Cannon and the way in which he's delayed this matter, but I'm going to remind you all of something, okay? Even in the Judge Cannon case, the indictments in that matter did not drop, like they literally have dropped within a year, okay? He was indicted in Fulton County last August. I know it feels like this has been a century since all of this began, but truly it has not. And all of this kind of like constant bitching and moaning about the delay of the criminal justice system here really in the end equates in many instances to a demand that because it's Trump and because we're traumatized and because we're angry, that we throw all judicial and constitutional norms out the window. Due process, grand jury indictments, right? The idea that somebody has to have actually been investigated and proven essentially to have committed a crime, or that it's more likely that they did than not before anything can be brought before a grand jury. These are the norms of our judicial system, okay? Ordinarily, we do not prosecute people without probable cause and without judicial norms like due process, okay? So I just truly want people to understand that, you know, the delays that we've experienced here, yes, there's no question that Trump has abused the appellate process, okay? That's a different matter. But the idea that somehow Trump should have already been in prison on an indictment that dropped a year ago is flat out disinformation or a complete misunderstanding of the way in which our judicial system works, okay? And that I say that all in the context of also understanding all the ways in which our judicial system, like every other institution in America, is inflected with white supremacy, sexism, and, you know, xenophobia and all sorts of other isms, all right? Like that's a given, okay? But I really do want people to stop with this thing of like, oh, a 2-day delay means that SCOTUS has somehow handed Trump the election. Okay, that's nonsense. And I'm going to say one other thing for everybody who's like, oh, we would have had a guilty verdict in advance of the election. We already have guilty verdicts. We have 34 criminal felony convictions already, okay? The fact that he may be convicted on November 1st versus November 15th doesn't change anything because the election was always going to be up to us anyway, right? So just truly, truly significant today. If I have to give any bit of advice today, it's to please ignore the people who are like, oh, here we go again. SCOTUS took one more delay, right? And look at the actual timetable of possibility here in light of the greatest predictions of what is likely to happen, okay? It is not unlikely at this moment that Donald Trump will go to trial for January 6th and trying to overthrow the 2020 election 6 weeks before the 2024 election. Okay. That is not an unreasonable expectation at this moment in time. Okay. So hang on for that. And I have to remind everybody, litigation is unpredictable. All sorts of shiz can go down between now and then that could completely change the timetable because trials are unpredictable. Litigation is unpredictable. Things happen, like people get sick, people die. Not saying that's going to happen, but acts of God take place, right? But I just want to point out that on the current timetable, if we get a ruling on immunity that says special evidentiary test, send it back down to Judge Chutkan's courtroom, she is free and clear to set a trial date in the middle of September. So hold on. All right. Just hold on. All right. Let me just say a couple of other things here about where we sit in relation to this, because somebody asked a question about how would a test play out in Judge Chutkan's courtroom? Reminder, you want to ask me questions in advance of the broadcast. You can become a paid subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month. You get to ask me questions for hours before every broadcast, and I will answer them on the air or in writing. Okay. The way that the test would work, so there's several means by which applying whatever test the Supreme Court puts down, if it does so, the other thing it may do, just because, people should be rational about this, it could also say no absolute immunity here, no immunity of any kind, because all the acts that are alleged don't fall within the scope of presidential authority. That's a possibility. They could just knock him down completely with a dissent from Alito and Thomas, because what else would be new? But that could happen, right? Again, nobody's going to know what the opinion is until we know it. But all that said, assuming that there is a test put down, there will be briefing, there will be absolutely oral argument, there may be an opportunity for evidence to be presented, all right? We don't know how Judge Chutkan is going to choose to handle this, and it will depend very much on the test, okay? But essentially, this could be handled with briefs. It could be handled with opening brief, with affidavits attached to it, with evidence, right? It could be, which could include transcripts of text messages, witness testimony in front of the January 6th committee, witness testimony to the FBI. There's all sorts of ways that this could be handled without calling witnesses. And then there would be an opposition brief and presumably a reply and an oral argument. If the judge chooses to hold an evidentiary hearing on it, it runs pretty much like a mini trial. Call witnesses, cross-examine them, introduce documents. One side does that, the other side does it. You get opening statements, you get closing arguments on a given evidentiary hearing. And evidentiary hearings are fun. I used to do them all the time, all right? That's a possibility for how it could go. And Judge Chutkan is not going to take forever to rule on that, all right? The opinions that we saw out of Judge Chutkan's courtroom before we began this trajectory up to the Supreme Court were incredibly well written. They were decided quickly, and they were well reasoned, okay? They were solid, okay? So again, we'll have to see how this plays out, but that is one way in which it could go. Okay. I talked about Julian Assange yesterday. He's not a journalist. You can go back and watch yesterday's broadcast. Okay. I am going to talk just for a quick minute about yesterday's election results, because everybody was anxiously awaiting what happened with Lauren Boebert. She did, in fact, win the Republican primary, but a lot of folks have missed the bigger takeaway here, because the mainstream media buried the lead. She only won 43% of the vote from the GOP in her new district. She won 43% of the vote. The remainder was split between the other 4 candidates for that particular office. And that does not bode well at all in a general election, because Lauren Boebert has name recognition. She's a known figure. And if more than 50% of the Republicans there were not willing to vote for her, that tells me that there's a problem in that district come November. Okay, so again, I want everyone to just take a little bit of a breather on this, because 43% is not a majority. And we know already that there is a substantial part of the GOP voting base that is done with Trump and his minions. Full stop, right? All these 20 to 25% of people who voted for Nikki Haley after she dropped out of the race in all of those Republican primaries, remember that? We're going to see fallout on that front for serious people in the kind of inner circle of Trump. And so wait to see how this plays out in November. We don't really need to get devastated about it or be upset about it or anything like that. It's 43%. I saw that and I was like, okay, good luck, friend. Let's see how that goes in November. Not that she's any friend of mine. Also, unfortunately, Jamal Bowman lost yesterday. Got gosh, I have a lot I could say about this, but as a former New Yorker, potentially back in that neck of the woods soon, I just, and I'm always a New Yorker, I'm a New Yorker for life. But in any event, the key concern that I have about how this played out is that Latimer appeared to have won on the backs of this newly redistricted area that includes an incredibly wealthy white suburban population in Westchester, New York. And that means that the part of that district that is in the Bronx is likely to be yet again neglected in their congressional representation. And that bothers me, right? Because every time I look at an election, what I'm looking at is, does the person who is likely to be elected, because of course we still have the, actual election, this was the primary, does the person who's actually been elected, are they going to represent the most marginalized people in their district? And all the indications here are that the answer to that is no. And that really bothers me. It really bothers me. And I know there's a lot of people who have a lot of criticism of Jamal Bowman. Fine, you can have your opinion. But I'm going to tell you that one thing that was not the case was that Jamal Bowman did not ignore the poorest of the poor people in Co-op City in the Bronx who desperately, desperately need federal funding for things like adequate housing and, social salvation benefits, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? He cared about those people. And I think that it's going to be very interesting to watch how this goes. And for everybody who thinks that Latimer is going to be a good representative, I just have two words for you, and those words are Joe Manchin. We'll have to see how this goes. I'm not convinced that he's going to do right by any Democrats at all, for a variety of reasons. Okay. I want to just talk for a second about the issue of deep canvassing, because we spent a lot of time here talking about deep canvassing on the broadcast, literally since 2018. For those of you who don't know, there's a key factor about deep canvassing that a lot of people discount. And it's the idea that, let's back up for a second. For those who don't know what deep canvassing is essentially carrying on conversations with people, using active listening and finding empathy for their positions and their needs, and then having conversations about how your candidate or those who are running in your area are going to work to meet those needs. Essentially separate and apart from party. You're not doing this thing of vote Democrat no matter what, vote blue no matter what. You're oh, you really care about your electric bill? There's this great candidate running who actually is working to lower energy costs. And here's how they're planning on doing it, right? You think about Danica Rome, first transgender official elected in the state of Virginia. Danica Rome ran on traffic in Northern Virginia and won on that basis, okay? First statewide elected transgender person in the Virginia legislature. And she's now been reelected multiple times, okay? So she's a prime example of this, right? You run on issues and you canvass on issues that really matter to people in their own homes. Now, a couple things about deep canvassing in this arena, because somebody gave a great example of this on the Patreon feed this morning, where essentially, okay. Ooh, boy. Somebody just posted a comment that just set my heart off. Okay, just hold on a second, because I'm going to come back to that because it's important. All right. One of the things that I think people need to recognize about deep canvassing is that you can have an impact on people that you come across in your everyday life in a single conversation. And someone posted something on the Patreon feed about this morning about how they had a conversation with someone about the threat to IVF. And about do you realize that one of the things that's happening in this election that's being signaled in this plan that the Republicans have called Project 2025 is completely ending IVF? And they had this conversation in passing with just someone they knew in their daily life. And that person was oh my God, I had no idea. And I wouldn't have my kids if it hadn't been for IVF. I've never really been involved in politics, but man, I'll turn out for that issue, right? That's the kind of thing that we need to move in the direction of. You need to move in the direction of having conversations with people that meet them on issues that they care about. And you never know how this is going to land. I heard another story from one of our followers the other day along the lines of, I said something to my cashier at the grocery store who had never heard of Project 2025. And they were like, wow, I'm going to go Google that because, I'm not really that invested in elections right now. And I had no idea that was happening. So these periodic conversations can really make a difference in how people function, how they respond to the election, and the like. Okay, I'm coming back to this comment because I don't want to miss it. There's somebody here who said, I don't think politicians should represent everyone, especially fascists and bigots. All right, I'm going to say something here because I really want this to be heard, okay? There is a difference between representing your constituents, which is what every single politician is supposed to do, and endorsing fascists and bigots, okay? When you are elected from a given district, you don't have to take every position that your constituents advocate for and run with it into Congress. That's not what you're elected to do, okay? But you are elected to do good for everyone who lives in your district, okay? So you don't say oh, here's the area in my town where there's been redlining, which sucks. No area should ever be redlined so that Black people can't live there, right? But you don't say, because this area is redlined, I'm going to make sure that the benefits that I get thanks to federal legislation only go to this side of town. All right? We elect people to represent everybody, right? For their betterment, whether they like it or not. Okay? So you got to draw a line here. And honestly, this to me is an extremely uninformed comment. Okay? People are elected to do good for the constituents who elected them, all of them, even if they didn't vote for those people. You have heard Joe Biden say this. You have heard President Obama say this, that they're here to represent all Americans, not just the Americans who voted for them, right? Because that's what the other side does. That's Donald Trump standing up and saying, I'm not sending PPE or ventilators to blue states. That's Donald Trump saying we're going to cut funding to sanctuary cities. That's people like Ron DeSantis and Greg Abbott trafficking migrants on planes and buses and dumping them in blue locations, right? That's what that looks like. It is elected officials doing the bidding of only a portion of their constituents. So if you are elected to represent an entire district, you better represent it for the betterment of them. That doesn't mean you have to endorse the neo-Nazis who happen to live there. Okay. But it does mean that you keep in mind the needs of every aspect of your constituents when you go to court. Okay. When you go to Congress, rather. You do not say, I'm only representing you because I agree with you. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. That's not how it should ever work, by the way. It's participatory democracy. The people that we elect are supposed to represent the people in their district, right? So please be smart about this. This is not something that, you can't make comments like that and expect that they're not going to land in a particular way. They're divisive, right? And what we need more than anything right now, right, is to stand up for democratic norms, all right? And democratic norms say that the district that you are elected to, you go to Congress to represent all the people of that district. That doesn't mean that you walk in and you say, I have 3 neo-Nazis living in my district, I'm going to endorse full-blown fascism. It literally means that you don't carve out benefits or any other form of your advocacy for any particular group. Okay. And that's actually really good. I don't want representatives going up and saying I'm not going to advocate for the transgender members of my community because I'm anti-trans, right? Republicans do that all the time. I'm not going to advocate for women who need abortion services because I don't care about them. That's not what you're supposed to do as an elected official, right? So, a whole chunk of this has to be about pulling people together, right? Not endorsing far right-wing positions, but understanding that people who are elected are there to serve everyone in their community. All right. Again, I have to just say that one of the things that I find really disturbing these days in the way in which trauma responses are playing out on our side of the fence is that I see more and more people wanting to adopt very Trumpian styles of messaging. Or very Trumpian styles of leading even, right? Oh, well, they did that to us, so we're going to do it to them, right? That's straight Trumpism, right? Oh, well, Trump would arrest Joe Biden, so Joe Biden should go arrest Trump if there's immunity granted. No. You have a moral code or you don't. You believe in democracy or you don't. You follow democratic norms and the Constitution or you don't. It's really very simple. And, one of the things that we desperately need in this era from a messaging standpoint is consistent recommendations for the application of democratic norms, of the justice system in an equitable fashion, of the terms of the Constitution as they've been interpreted appropriately, right? That's what we really need. That's what we really need, okay? We need that way more than F those people. which doesn't work, right? Doesn't work anyway. Okay, we had a question about term limits, and oh my God, this is like such a morass. Okay, I will just tell you that I have had some conversations over the last 4 years with a couple of senators who are, deeply invested in Supreme Court reform about the topic of term limits, and there are debates on both sides for whether or not term limits are a good idea. Do I want a term limit for Ketanji Brown Jackson? No. Because if her term happens to be up when a Republican is president, she will be replaced by a Republican, right? What I am more deeply invested in is things like court expansion and frankly, like impeaching justices who have taken bribes. Because I think that's where we're at. And I think that an enforceable Supreme Court code of ethics, which, by the way, there was a proposal announced yesterday by AOC and Jamie Raskin on this front, saying that no Supreme Court justice could take a gift valued at more than $50 and over the course of a year can't take any gifts that total are valued at more than 100, right? That's a completely legitimate code of ethics. And I hope it passes because it should. All that said, I don't think that term limits are necessarily the answer. I think the answer is Supreme Court expansion, impeaching justices who have engaged in deeply unethical behavior, bribery, high crimes, and misdemeanors, and then assuring that there is an enforceable Supreme Court code of ethics, which we don't have right now. That's the answer. So strongly encourage you all to kind of think through that. And I'm sure that assuming that we win in November, there's going to be an enormous amount of discussion about these issues heading into the new term of the Congress starting in January. But obviously we need movement on this, and we're not going to have it until the House is taken back, because that's where impeachment starts. And, until we've got a majority in the Senate that is willing to nuke the filibuster, which we may have if we elect Ruben Gallego and Debbie Murcazel-Powell. And if we manage to get, Sherwood Brown reelected and various other folks who are really under threat right now. Okay. So that's that. I do not believe in term limits for everything. I'll just be really candid about that. And I'm also just going to say one other thing. I think that, I'm not a fan of age limits either. Because I'm just going to tell you something here, okay? I'm going to remind you all that the average age of Supreme Court justices when the Supreme Court began, people were dying in their late 40s and early 50s, right? And now we're at a point where, your 50s are kind of considered your prime. So, you set an age limit that says you have to retire when you're 65, and you have a phenomenal Supreme Court justice who's sharp as a tack, doing great work. You want that person forced off the court? I don't, let alone under a Republican president. So again, you've got to think about the slippery slope of this, right? And I'm going to ban this person because I'm just tired of this. And I have to say something about that too in just a second. But one of the things that I just want people to be aware of is you have to think about the worst case scenario that could come out of some of these suggestions, right? The worst case scenario on an age limit is Ketanji Brown Jackson turned 65. She's still got 15 great years of incredible progressive opinions in her. She bears an enormous influence on others on the Supreme Court by that point. You're going to force her out the door? Really? So, again, there are means to handle this so that we are certain that there isn't, undue influence on the Supreme Court. And we should do those first. Okay, that's what I have to say about it. Okay, all right. I'm just going to say one other thing here, because yesterday after the broadcast, after I complained about everybody getting snarky in the comments on Monday and Tuesday, there were some comments on the YouTube broadcast after the fact that were are you yelling at us? Right? I'm not yelling at you. That's the first thing. I'm not yelling at anybody, and I'm not talking down to anybody, and that's never my intention here or anything like that. But I will say that I have very, very little tolerance, having done this for 7.5 years, for people who come at me with a particularly aggressive or nasty attitude. And I read that stuff at this point in a split second. I see it coming. I know who that personality is. I know that it will only get worse. And I know that if it continues after people have been warned, stop it, it will turn into out and out trolling and harassment. And I just have a zero tolerance policy for it at this point. People can criticize me for it. They cannot like it. That's fine. You don't have to watch me. You don't have to listen to me. There's plenty of other people out there doing commentary. But on my feed, with all of our like wonderful community of people, some of whom have been here since like the end of 2016, I have a strong sense of urgency about protecting the sanctity and the kindness of this community. And I'm going to do it. And if it means that, you know, you get dinged, you get dinged. There's no coming back from that. I don't add anybody back after I've blocked you. Sorry. There's only been one instance in the history of like our time on YouTube that I've actually done that. And I will just tell you, we had something happen a couple of weeks ago where somebody who had really badly trolled me like 3 or 4 years ago approached my staff about wanting to be unblocked. And my staff thankfully advised them that we have a no unblocking policy, because I have like 200,000 people on my block list right now, you guys. I can't like, there's no way to sort through those. On YouTube, it's like impossible, okay? And the second that my staff advised this person that we weren't going to do that, what they got back from that person was more trolling, all right? Like really nasty comments and like things that sounded like really narcissistic, like verging on narcissistic abuse, okay? Gaslighting. Like, so we don't make mistakes here, generally speaking, in who we block. Like I can only think of one instance where I did it accidentally. And that was somebody who had come over from another channel and I didn't recognize who they were. All right. That person got unblocked, but there's literally been no one else who rises to that level. And so this is, once again, just a little bit of a warning that if you act out in the comments, I will block you and I will not hesitate to do it. And I will sleep well at night and I will feel no guilt. So please make sure that you are absolutely mindful of the way in which you behave in the comments, okay? No fat shaming, no prison rape jokes, no claims about like people's bodies, right? We have like zero tolerance policy for that. You make a comment about my appearance, even if it's like intended to be flirty, you will be gone. Okay. And that leaves aside all the other obvious isms: no racism, no sexism, no misogyny, no xenophobia, no homophobia, no transphobia. That stuff will get you gone. And if you are rude to other people in the comments, like out and out aggressive, you will also get banned. All right. So everybody's got kind of like the warning. You can all take it or leave it. You all have agency and power. And I would just encourage you to remember that one of the things that we desperately need more of in this country is safe and kind community, right? And all of this is in the aim of building and maintaining that, all right? I'm proud of our community. I want to keep it kind. It has been a labor of love over the last 7.5 years to make sure that it stays that way. And the fact that we keep growing here, which is wonderful, is not going to change the baseline standard, all right? So that's it, my friends, all right? And I wish you all a wonderful Wednesday. Of course, if there's a need for breaking news later on today, I will be back. I will see you all tomorrow. I will see you all Friday. Next week, I'm going to warn everybody this week, I am on the East Coast doing various things, and the schedule is likely to be very wonky. At this point, it is very unclear whether or not there's going to be a broadcast on Monday. If you want advanced warning of any of the broadcasts next week, when they're going to happen, because they will not likely be at regular time and there will be no broadcast on the 4th, you got to become a subscriber at patreon.com/resistancelive. Everybody's going to get advanced warning over there of when I'm going live on a given day. It's not going to be at the regular time, some days at least, okay? But that's where you will have the most up-to-date information. And you can subscribe there for as little as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast. Steal of the century. If you're getting something out of this, I strongly encourage you to go subscribe and support me and my team. All right. Much love, everyone. I will see you tomorrow at the latest. Enjoy your Wednesday. All right. Bye.